Now, I have to admit to a slight commercial interest in the next fellow-elect. Professor Paul Memmott is the Director of the Aboriginal Environments Research Centre at the University of Queensland, but he's also the author of one of the few scholarly books that we've made money on. Paul Memmott.
Good evening. Thank you for bringing me here. I'm probably the first architect to be made a fellow of this academy. How did my early transition from architecture into the social sciences happen? In the late 1960s, I was studying painting at night as an abstract colourist and architecture by day with a growing interest in constructs of space. The UQ campus was a stimulating place with regular forums on human rights addressed by left-wing philosophers such as Peter Wertheim, Ian Hinckliffe, Ralph Summey, radical activists such as Brian Laver, Dan O'Neill, voicing not only Marx, Trotsky and Lenin, but also Fromm, Chomsky and Bookchin, and Aboriginal leaders like Kath Walker, Pastor Don Brady, Don Duck Davison, Dennis Walker and Sam Watson Sr. The forums culminated in regular demonstrations. We were lined up by alphabetical order of university department, so poor architecture students were placed first before arts and anthropology, and thus the first to be manhandled and arrested in the big demos of 5,000 people marching for civil rights in the Bajocki-Peterson era. My induction into social courage. The dominant social science at UQ was psychology, led by Professor Donald McElwain, who with his colleagues were engaging in cognitive and intelligence testing on Aboriginal people. In the early 1960s, psychology included some anthropology courses, so much so that McElwain was involved in the establishment of the inaugural Department of Anthropology and Sociology in 1965, and with Peter Lawrence appointed the first chair in 1966. However, I was being influenced by an innovatory overseas psychology trend, the formation of architectural psychology in places like University of London, Surrey, Strathclyde, and in the USA with the likes of Roger Barker, Edward T. Hall and Robert Summer, who were publishing on territoriality and use of space or proxemics. As the first architecture student at UQ to receive a full-time scholarship, I chose as my topic, my PhD topic, use of space by Aborigines in northwest Queensland, after seeing the socio-spatial properties of the fringe camps in Mount Isa, Cloncurry and Dejara on a trip requested by Nugget Coombs. To complement my principal architecture supervisor, Professor Balsini, who had a track record in Aboriginal housing, I chose a second supervisor from psychology, an ethologist, Professor Glenn McBride, whose claim to fame was discovering the pecking order amongst chooks, and who was moving from animal social behaviour into human spatial behaviour. He was to bring me into contact with other ethologists visiting Australia. For example, Adam Kendon, who gave a seminar on the study of greeting behaviour at American parties and later studied Aboriginal Sign Language. And Woody Denham, who went to the Sandover River to study spatial behaviour and garbage in Aluwarra camps with the American ethnoarchaeologists James O'Connell and Lewis Binford. Glenn McBride indoctrinated me into scientific method, always chiding me for failing to elicit precisely what data units I was collecting and how I was going to analyse them, and he engaged me into naturalistic observation. However, my readings on primate behaviour became superseded by my preoccupations with Kuhn, Levi-Strauss, Piaget, Popper, Chomsky, and everything I could find on Aboriginal Australia, Elkin, Stanner, Burnt, Rowley, to name but a few. I was coming to the realisation that I had to reinvent myself as a social anthropologist. In 1973, I organised on UQ campus an interdisciplinary seminar of all those whom I could find who were doing research on Aboriginal topics. These included the sociologist John Weston, who had recently in 1970 filled the first chair of sociology, and who became a lifelong mentor. In 1975, well advanced in my PhD fieldwork with the Lardle people of Mornington Island, I was invited to join von Sturmer's honours anthropology class. Then, with the arrival of the first chair in anthropology, Professor Bruce Rigsby, I gained my third co-supervisor to effect my transition as an anthropologist in Aboriginal Australia, and was able to participate in the anthropology seminar program with the full postgraduate cohort, not only of von Sturmer but Athol Chase, John Taylor, Peter Sutton, and later Chris Anderson, David Trigger and Diane Smith, all colleagues for life. It's to all these people that I pay homage today as my early teachers, mentors and peers in the establishment of my transdisciplinary path into the social sciences and Indigenous studies. I've overlooked to mention anything of my current work, but I'm engaged in such topics as Aboriginal cultural change, good practice in service delivery to Aboriginal people, Aboriginal housing, homelessness, spiritual homelessness, crowding, Aboriginal perception of climate change, reforming institutional architecture for Aboriginal people, and most recently with the invention of nanofibrillated spinifex cellulose to catalyse a cottage industry in the farming of spinifex grass in arid Aboriginal communities. Thank you.